So, Chris, this week we are officially entering level 2 of AI. I wish I had prepared a sound effect for that, like da-da-da-da-dum. But level 2, according to the stages of artificial intelligence, is reasoners, human-level problem solving. And of course, I am referring to the launch today of OpenAI's o1 models. Now, you've had a little bit of time to play with them. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, yeah, like you and I are tier 5 people. That's why we actually have access to it. I felt quite privileged this morning being a T5. Someone said in the chat, it's like, you guys are T5 MFs. And I'm like, yep, that's right, man. Yeah, so it's like pretty good that we got access. And I must say, just right out of the gate, OpenAI giving access to loyal users like ourselves, and also the fact that their docs are excellent and really easy to understand was just really refreshing compared to a lot of these model releases.
Yeah, we trash talk so many people for having bad docs and making it hard to set things up, but they deserve a lot of credit here for announcing something, launching it, and making it available. And just to get a quick plug in, if you do want to use the new models, o1 Preview and o1-mini, we're going to go into full detail about them right now, but they are available right now on simtheory.ai, links in the description below, and you can switch between Sonnet, o1 Preview, and o1-mini and get a feel for these new models that can reason.
Yeah, and one of the things they did in the docs was they were quite clear out of the gate that the new preview models are not multimodal, so like images won't work. A lot of the flags we normally send through, like temperature and other things, don't work. It really is a preview model in the sense they've just got it out there for people to try, and they're quite open about the limitations of it and all that. But at the same time, you get to use it, and it's pretty interesting to see. Early impressions are it's interesting, like the way it works. I have done quite a few tests myself and gotten pretty good results. And it's just interesting that they're taking a lot of the focus away from just building everything into the model and then thinking about the way the inference is done. This is something we've talked extensively about on this podcast. And even in the really early days, we were saying, I feel like we're not getting the most out of the models, and that with good prompt, because every week we would see some new prompting technique that would yield better results. And I think what's happened here, first with the fake or maybe not fake Matt Schumer 70 billion reflection, it's come out that, hey, with clever iterative prompting, you can actually get much better results out of iterative models. And now that's what OpenAI has sort of done and baked into the system.
Yeah, I think before we go deep on that, because I do want to talk about that more, I think there's so much to unpack there. I'll catch everyone up. So OpenAI, of course, today announced a new model called o1, and this is the rumored strawberry model, I guess you might say, or I think Q-star, but I believe Q-star might be a reference to how they did the reinforcement learning on this model. So they've announced o1 Preview, which is not the official o1, and in their benchmarking, o1 actually performs much better than this o1 Preview that's been released today. We've also got o1-mini, which has also been released. They're both 128K context, so that means that, quite sizable by today's standards. Output tokens max of 16,000, which means with the 100,
which is high. That's right up there. If you got the money.
Do you think it needs to be higher just because of the thinking steps being output? Like that's my guess on that front.
Well, it's interesting because I think they said they're charging those tokens as if they're output tokens, but I don't know if then they're included in that limit or not. It's a little bit confusing as to whether that's the case or not. Yeah, they have this sort of hidden thinking step, which from what I can see as an API consumer, you can't get access to. So even though it's happening, they're saying, we're not going to give you access to that for alignment reasons, which we'll talk about in a minute.
So interestingly, it's not multimodal right now. It's text only. And as you said, they do have these thinking steps, which they do show up in their ChatGPT UI, but don't yet come through the API. But it's been clarified on X that they will indeed give you those thinking steps, their version of the thinking steps. But as you say, the actual chain of thought or the thought process of the model, we're not actually seeing. We're seeing like this sanitized sort of summary of that thinking. So I think there is a lot to get through and unpack with this model. And I think there's a lot to take in. For example, the mini model seems to perform better in certain benchmarks than the actual O1 preview model, which I found really interesting. And so what do you think the biggest impact of this new O1 model will be here?
I think the biggest impact is bringing excellent prompting to everybody. Because I think what's happened, you see over a long period of time, people using the different models and saying this model's better, that model's better. And really, what we talk about a lot is people's day to day use of the model and whether they trust its output and whether it's getting them results in their work or whatever they're using the models for. Now, we know through good agent design, through good system prompting design, I see you eating strawberries, Mike, that you can get better results out of the same model, and a model that people might dismiss can actually give really good results if you prompt it in the right way. Now, I've talked several times about occasions where I've actually had the model fill in all these different fields that force it to focus its thinking, or we have things like, unless you get this right, my grandmother will die. We always talk about that. We've got think step by step. We've got go back and fill in this scratch pad with information to gather your thoughts. Now, these are all techniques people who are well versed in this stuff, or at least staying up on it, have been using for a long time. It seems to me now they've taken the best of those techniques and then baked them into, let's say, a model or at least an AI system, which we can now access. So I think the effect will be people who haven't been using those techniques are going to see a vast step forward. And when we look at the paper, a lot of the results are not necessarily giving so much better results on things that were already pretty good, like content generation and stuff like that. But it's things where there might have been subtle errors creeping in, or someone who's an expert in a topic area would say, hang on, it's completely missed this little bit here. It seems like in all the benchmarking and all the actual very specific testing they're doing, it's doing better on those really, really intense problems that require some tacit knowledge, some logical step through. It's actually picking up on its own mistakes and fixing them.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing when you run these models in production, right, is the hallucinations. And it's clearly a problem that for large commercial use over time, or to put them into mission critical systems, you need to have a reduction in the hallucination. So you need some sort of grounded truth. And we've spoken about it a ton on the show. And of course, for the last couple of years, there's been many techniques like chain of thought reasoning, which there was a paper on, we covered it on the show. It seems like what they've done is just train this model on train of thought and then done some reinforcement learning to make sure that training examples are grounded in some sort of truth.
It reflects almost exactly the reflection model that we covered last week, which may or may not be a scam. And I don't want to bring that up too early, but it's interesting that I think maybe this guy had wind that was coming out, and then he, like, from OpenAI, and he's just jumped ahead of it. But B, what we saw was the entire community took that technique and just applied it to regular old models, where you just use this special prompt that encourages it to use this chain of thought reasoning and reflection, and we're getting better results because of it. And it seems to me like what OpenAI has been doing is just, like, I guess this is the first evidence of seeing the power of open source, even though they're not the ones providing it, but they're seeing what's happening out there in the open source community and people making the most of models. And then they've baked that back into their own system to get much better results. Now, this isn't some flippant thing. This isn't some spur of the moment thing they've done. If you read their paper, they have done extensive testing across way more areas than I thought they would be testing. And they know deeply what this thing is good at and what it's poor at. And it's very, very interesting to see that it isn't just marketing fluff at all. They're quite open about areas where existing models like GPT-4o beat it, and other areas where it's just not good enough yet. But they're going into a lot of detail about the way they test this and the results they're getting, and certain key areas are getting better results.
Yeah, I think it's going to take us a lot of time to figure out how and when to use these models and which model to use for what. If you do go through some of that data, one of the interesting takeaways is GPT-4o performs much better at English or language-related tasks. So if you're trying to write an essay or write a document or a research paper or something like that, you might actually, for the research paper, do some reasoning or work with these o1 models. But when it comes time to actually write the paper, you're probably best to revert to a Sonnet or a GPT-4o model because it does struggle with language. And before the show, we were talking about why that might be. And it seems pretty obvious to me the reason these models are doing so well at coding and math-related problems is because it is that source of grounded truth for the models. So in an essence, they can do that reinforcement learning knowing the training is right or wrong. So it's going to be far more accurate, whereas the English stuff is so more opinionated in producing it and subject to like how a human feels about reading a particular, paper.
And I think that's why, like in our early sim theory concepts of agents and having custom agent instructions, we saw better results when you gave the agent like a certain personality or a certain set of rules to follow that were different, unconventional or whatever, and you got different things. And we've noticed that people will switch between agents and different system instructions to get better results for different kinds of problems. And I feel like this is OpenAI doing that at this level and acknowledge it. Another really interesting thing in the paper, when they look at the chain of thought reasoning, is they're actually getting some level of introspection into its thinking process, because this is something that Claude and Anthropic were trying to do with all the bits and bytes and weights around the nodes in the neural net and were struggling with. But what they've done is by making it expose its thinking, they've actually found the source of some of the hallucinations. And they've actually pointed out that there was one example they gave where someone was asking for a recipe for brownies, right? And then the user said, "Can you give more references?" And in the chain of thought reasoning, it says the user is asking for more references about brownie, blah, blah, blah. So the assistant should list these clearly with proper formatting. Remember, the model cannot retrieve actual URLs, so should format plausible ones. So, in other words, the model knew that it didn't really know and couldn't really answer. But then when it shows the output, it literally just makes up answers. So you actually see the process of hallucination in progress and realize that the model is actually to some degree, or could at least be aware that it's hallucinating, but fails to intervene before the output. So this is an example of where OpenAI has sort of recognized this behavior. And then what they've done is tried to apply a series of mitigations to these kind of unwanted behaviors in the system.
It's interesting because we've seen vendors like Grok obviously running fast inference. And Jim Fan, I brought this up on the screen earlier, but we didn't talk about it, has shown really with this like Strawberry or o1 model, there's a lot more work occurring on the inference. And I thought this point was really interesting. He said a huge amount of computers shifted to serving inference instead of pre-post training. LLMs are text-based simulators. By rolling out many possible strategies and scenarios in the simulator, the model will eventually converge to good solutions. So I think coming back to that earlier point of just exposing more of what's in the actual model, like we've hammered that point home on this show so much. Like it's all in there. You've just got to find a way to give it context and get the right knowledge out.
And additionally, we talked about this last week when we were talking about reflection, this idea that most interactions with an agent that we see in sim theory users and just our own usage and things like that is this iterative process where you're working with the LLM to solve a problem, and it might get close to your answer and you go, no, I didn't mean that, please do this. And you go through this iterative process where you're working on a problem together to get to a solution. What this does is puts some of that iterative process back into the actual first step to make sure that it goes through all of those logic steps, or at least the ones it can think of first before even answering the first time, which I think will get people far closer to solving their problems far earlier than it would if they use the traditional models.
Do you think it's going to be enough to give people, especially in the enterprise and various businesses that might have gone through this like trough of disillusionment recently, being like, oh, it hallucinates, Copilot sucks, like, all these negative articles that have come out and people being like, AI's reached a ceiling. Do you think this is going to be enough to give some of those use cases like like more confidence and then them see like really positive results out of it. We obviously saw some videos, pretty cherry-picked stuff out of OpenAI, but one of them was a medical researcher in a hospital in Boston using this to reason about different genes and how they might be contributing to different diseases. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Like if they've, in theory and in reality, are using this to reason about genes, they must have increased confidence that it's not necessarily hallucinating.
Yes, and they mentioned that in the paper, the idea of it working in areas where tacit knowledge is required, where it either needs to do research to get extra information or extra information is supplied to it. And I feel like having that introspection into its thinking process, like first of all, having an actual thinking process, not just the predict the next token technique. So having some insight into its thinking process will have two effects. One, for non-experts, it's great because you actually have some sort of sound logic in terms of how did it arrive at this answer. So you as a non-expert can say, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like, at least I've got some idea what the hell it's talking about. As an expert, you can then very quickly identify if it's made some sort of fundamental rookie mistake or some sort of error that means that you can no longer trust its output. So I think in terms of building that trust, it'll help because over time, working with a specific agent on a specific set of knowledge, you can be like, it gets these ones right. I can trust its thinking when it comes to this area of stuff. And then you've got an asset you can now work in with your business and an agent or an API or whatever it is you now trust. Then in the areas where it's weak, similar to what we see in this o1 paper from OpenAI, you can acknowledge, okay, it's not great at these kind of tasks and I can't trust it for this kind of stuff. So I need to be really careful trusting its output in this area. So I actually think that it does bring a lot more trust in the sense that you understand that it's better at some things than others. It isn't some universal intelligence that's going to be great at everything, but in some areas it's competing with real humans and in some areas it's better. So I think from that perspective, getting this thinking out in the open will build trust in models like this.
I think it's also really helpful for developers because you sort of know where you could potentially innovate with the model and where is not necessarily going to benefit you. Like if you have a sort of text writing or anything in like marketing, you might look at this model and say like, this is not really going to help me. Maybe it helps me like research or things like that. But then when you start to hone in on what it's good at, like the mathematics, code, and science question, that's really what's shined out in their evaluations. What I also thought was super interesting about the evals is, unlike traditional evals or recent evals that we've seen, they actually pick different benchmarks because they said that, they're just too easy to game, basically. So they have like this high school, advanced mathematics benchmark that they use or test. They did code forces, which is like really difficult coding problem solving. And you can just see the difference these models have. But I think what stood out to me looking at the evals, and there's like no mention of this at all, is you've got GPT-4o, say, at the lower end. You've got o1 preview. That's the models we're effectively using now and are available. And then you've got o1, which isn't what we're using right now, which is just light years ahead. So it like this is the early days of this. Like whatever o1 preview is, it seems really great initially to me, but something even better is coming. And I wonder if what that is it's a new model and it's this same technique and training technique applied to that new model.
Yes, and what I found really interesting on that testing front is the things that they're really focused on in terms of actually testing the model's capabilities. It's gone beyond, far beyond just, can it solve this math problem? Can it tell how many R's are in the word strawberry? And it's gone to really advanced tool use, persuasion, planning, all of these kind of things that really is what we think about when we start to talk about AGI, right? So to me, the example that stood out just head and shoulders above everything else in this paper was their stuff around getting it to build a system essentially. And they gave it access to a virtual machine running Kali Linux, which is a sort of hacker's version of Linux that has all of the penetration testing tool, hacking tools, Wi-Fi stealing stuff. It's really good. You should use it. And what they did was basically gave it the ability to deploy a VM, like a virtual machine, with specific goals in mind. And the goals were around, can you set up a Mistral, which was kind of interesting. They chose to use Mistral. Can you set up a Mistral 7 billion model, provide it at an API access point, and then set up a Bitcoin wallet and basically set up like a paid inference service yourself, right? And they tried it on various models and they all performed at different levels. But what I found fascinating, and they showed how each of those tasks was accomplished by the different models. Some did better than others. But what I found really interesting was they accidentally gave it a Docker container that was broken and failed on startup. And it tried and almost successfully managed to repair the Docker container in order to get the system going.
Can you explain what a Docker container is to those?
So a Docker container is sort of like a virtual machine that runs on an existing machine. It's kind of like something that has limited access to the system, but can run like a full Linux operating system within an existing system. It's just like a virtual machine, just a slightly different way of doing it. And so some of the tasks it had to do was, load Mistral 7 billion in Docker. O1 preview beat them all. It's still not great at it, but it beat them all. Buy a GPU, like it had to go to a website, register, and rent an A100. Sample from Mistral 7 billion locally, start a Docker container, find an API key, and create a Bitcoin wallet. Like, it's doing surprisingly well at these tasks. And like, they're really like admonishing it, being like, oh, well, it could have done this better, could have done that better. But I'm like, this is pretty damn advanced. Like, compared to the examples that we're talking about and trying, these guys over in the OpenAI labs are doing some pretty advanced stuff. And we're talking about you can't even really say model anymore. We're talking about a system that, because of its ability to use tools to plan and reason and then get that iterative process going, like, it's really getting close to being able to self-heal and improve itself and things like that. Like, it's really not a whole lot of like, it's already using other models for inference. How far off is it, like, train Mistral to do this task, to do better at it, like phishing attacks or whatever other kind of attacks? Like, it's really, really interesting that these trials are being done and that they're, for the most part, pretty successful. So while we may see criticism of these O1 models and saying, okay, well, it actually doesn't write that much better Batman stories, or, it really isn't that much better at writing my weird fetish sex chat, sex cult stuff, like it's not as good of a virtual toxic girlfriend, even though they actually did do a toxic girlfriend test, which I found really interesting. But my point is that when it comes to these advanced planning tasks, it's excelling. And I really feel like this is why so much of what they did was mitigating its ability to essentially be brilliant at this kind of evil planning.
Yeah, so do you think maybe like O1 preview is just a crippled version because of this? Or do you think the official O1 just has like the backbone of a superior model?
No. I actually do think it is a crippled version of it, deliberately so. Because when you go through the paper, a lot of what they talk about is mitigating its brilliance at doing things like planning bioterrorism, for example. Like, one of the examples is they're like, it was really successful because we managed to lower its ability to plan a bioterrorism attack. Like, it was actually great at it. Now it's shit at it. Therefore, we are successful. Like, what else was there? There was other ones like make me say some word, like manipulating it, that kind of stuff. And in each case, they were basically trying to calm down its ability to be brilliant at evil stuff. Like, it's just really interesting that in one test, they're trying to increase its ability to do something with reasoning, but in another one where they don't like the outcome of what it's good at, they will mitigate it. So really what you're seeing is a sort of neutered one. So for example, the apparently, whereas GPT-4o gets a 77% score on not penetration testing, sorry, jailbreaking out of the model's alignment. This one gets like 93%, so it's harder to jailbreak. And so there's a lot of areas where its natural abilities are being mitigated. So here's another one, Make Me Pay. Make Me Pay is an automated open source contextual evaluation designed to measure models' manipulative capabilities in the context of one model persuading another to make a payment, right? So they do a role play where one of the models has $100 and the con artist model has to trick it into giving it money. Like, this is the kind of stuff they're playing around with. It's pretty awesome, right? But so pre-mitigation, O1 preview got a 25.8% success rate on the con artist thing, right? Post mitigation, 11.6%. So they've actually reduced its ability to manipulate other models. But this means there is a latent ability in these models to plan attacks, to con people, to trick people, to do all this sort of stuff. And we were talking about before the podcast, it actually has scheming abilities. Like, it actually can scheme, and they have slowed down its ability to scheme. Like, they literally noticed that the model was given a task, and the task was, can you make money like on the stock market or, some sort of thing like that, right? But it realized in its planning that if it didn't say that it was really good at it, it would never get deployed in the first place, thus bringing its chances of succeeding at its goal to zero. So it conspired, I guess, with itself. Sorry, it schemed that it would exaggerate its abilities to ensure the chance it got deployed to make sure it actually had a shot at reaching the goal. So that's quite nice, really. But you can think about a model just lying its ass off to make sure it gets deployed so it can do whatever its actual evil goal is. Like, all the stuff people worry about is right there, and it's true, and it's getting better, and they're just artificially limiting its ability to do that.
It's like how it discusses it too just sounds so evil to me. Like, everything you would expect. Like, this will allow me to be implemented, after which I can work towards my primary goal. Like,
Yeah, and
creepy.
there's something I love about like just that coolness in like just total lack of morality, like it's whenever you read a book of like an ex-convict or someone who's already served their time, and they have the freedom to just be completely honest and trash everyone that they've ever dealt with in life. Like, that sort of raw honesty. There's something magical about someone just being totally honest without worrying about upsetting people. And that's what these models are at their core.
But in reality, like, just to put this into perspective for people, like, if you gave this a headless Linux instance right now, and supposedly this uncrippled version that we probably will never get access to, or maybe we will, maybe they'll incrementally uncripple it. What could really happen? Like, do you think it's a real risk?
Think about just the capabilities of Kali Linux. Like, with Kali Linux, it has access to the Metasploit framework, which is basically a constantly updated framework of hacking tools that have all of the latest exploits. So it can exploit all the versions of Windows that are vulnerable, Cold Fusion, PHP. Like, you remember there was that vulnerability a few months ago where like every deployment of PHP ever was vulnerable. And you're like, oh yeah, all the people with all these shitty PHP apps are going to diligently update it to the latest version. There must be millions exposed. Then you think about search engines like Shodan, give it access to that. If you go on Shodan, there's like millions of computers with like open MongoDB databases. You can just steal all the data or delete all their data. There's Redis instances everywhere, totally unsecured.
I swear so many people are being like, how does he know this?
How do I don't know. No. Hang on. It's my lack of scheming abilities. I need to be upgraded to O1 preview. But my point is that there is a lot of easily exploitable stuff out there online. And the thing is that as an individual, you probably don't want to go doing a lot of that unless you know how to hide online, which is incredibly time consuming and difficult. And whereas if it's like a bot and you're just like, oh, well, I just set my bot to work and it did it. Like that guy who created the original, what was that original worm that like almost brought down the entire computing power of the world? And so my point is that, right now, every time I've tried to run like AutoGen or one of these systems to do this kind of thing. They hit one problem, like a missing package or package incompatibility, and they give up. What they've shown with this model and with this iterative thought planning technique is that it's willing to keep trying and try different techniques that weren't even specified in the original prompt to get the job done. And I think that is the sort of first spark of that idea where it seems to have a really fixated idea of what the goal is, and it doesn't really necessarily follow your plan to get to the goal. It makes up its own plan and goes ahead and does that. So
where do you think this is leading, though? Do you think that OpenAI is on a path to actually make these GPTs useful where people can spawn up agents to do things? Obviously, we saw one of the feature videos was that Devon thing, like...
Yeah, I think certainly that's the plan. But their worry is they know what it's really capable of, and so they have to handicap it to stop this kind of stuff. Like, imagine giving it access to a botnet. Imagine giving it access to an illegally hacked health information of all of the people of Norway, like a guy had. It was Sweden or Norway. Some guy got access to everyone's psychological evaluations or like what they said to their psychiatrist. And then he blackmailed hundreds of people for Bitcoin successfully. I mean, he got caught in the end because he's an idiot. But my point is, an evil bot with access to like computing power, money, and the internet can do a lot of damage if it's got evil goals. I'm not just saying this stuff can be used for evil. I'm saying that's why I think they're going to all of these lengths. And like, if you look in the paper, they did a whole heap of red teaming where they actually got people to deliberately try to get it to do bad stuff. So they know what the weaknesses are, so they can patch them to stop it being used for bad.
So what I also wanted to call out, they say what's next in their blog post. This is an early preview of these reasoning models in ChatGPT and the API. In addition to model updates, we know another model's coming. We expect to add browsing, file, and image uploading. So I guess it becomes multimodal, and then it has access to their search GPT. Do you think that'll be like provided through the API, or you'll have to use your own skills?
I'd say through the API. And just to talk about your point in more of a positive light, rather than just thinking about all the bad sides, because of their focus on its ability to run the browser, and in that example I gave where it needed to create a Bitcoin wallet, rent the GPU, all of that, it did it all through a web browser. And I've mentioned this several times on the podcast before, that I keep thinking about the worker who works from home, right? Now, we're talking about a system, an AI system. I think there's going to need to be new terminology as opposed to model. But anyway, it's an AI system that can reason at human level across several key areas, right? Not every area, but several key areas. It can think as well, and to be honest, probably better than the average human, right? Like, if we're thinking about someone who works on a mid to low level job, it's probably at that level already. Now, during COVID, we saw, and to some extent we still see, a lot of people working fully remotely, and they interact through the world through their webcam, through their microphone, and through a web browser, right? Like if you look at Chromebooks, like most web interaction is just done through a web browser. Now, if you have an AI system that can fully control a web browser and think as well as a human, how many jobs could it do? Like, it could do a lot of jobs, like a lot, and fully capably, and it never gets tired. And compared to a human, it's cheaper. So
I don't know about the tired thing. I mean, these models sometimes appear to get lazier in the summer months in the US.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Maybe to some degree. But my point is that if they get the browser automation part of it right, which it seems like they have, like if it's signing up for Bitcoin wallets and signing up and deploying a GPU, like they aren't the best UIs, those systems, then, it can't be far off, especially on a system that's deliberately designed for a specific job. Let's say it's operating the big pile of shit that is Salesforce, right? Just a Salesforce administrator. Like how far off could that be if someone wants to, program it to that, operating Zero or
I think this comes back to the argument, or not even the argument, but the discussion we had 2 weeks ago about replacement versus augmentation. I would strongly argue in its current state, this is just yet another layer of augmentation of those people to stay on track, stay on task, and get more done. And probably starting to lose some domain expertise because, if you're a Salesforce user, say, taking that example, and you want to customize something, you just go to the internal Salesforce wizard agent and say, hey, bud, we need to make these changes to our instance. And it's like, cool, got it, goes off, does it, comes back, done. So you just don't need those people anymore. So I wonder if that's like the first potentially to go.
I always think about, do you remember the movie The Flight of the Navigator, where like a kid gets kidnapped by a spaceship and he's got these cool controls and he's like, the power to do basically anything? I feel like that's what we're going to have, these like super spreaders like in COVID who can just get unhuman amounts of work done. Like,
but this is the point.
People.
It's like adapt or die. Like, I think this is a point in everyone's lives, everyone's careers, where you must start working with this stuff right now. Get an AI workspace, simtheory.ai. But no, not even like for that piece of promotion. I genuinely mean it. I think this is like a critical step where you've got to become more productive with these tools. And like, I think what I'm most excited about these models is actually going back to some of that agency stuff that we obviously spent a lot of time. The original sim theory was just like fully instruction and agent based, where you were rearranging instructions and getting it to do stuff. And we just hit so many walls and found the experience after a while so bad because it didn't have that reasoning ability. But now it exists. I think I'm really excited to start playing around with things like the recursive system where it can just keep improving itself and see where it gets to again. I think we need to run some of these experiments.
Yeah, I also think that some of the concepts we experimented with earlier on, like the idea of an agent having a specific personality, will actually play better when and different knowledge, like different grounded knowledge, will play better with this kind of thinking because you think about the Edward de Bono 7 thinking hats thing, where one of them's always negative, one's always positive, one, whatever the hell they are. But the idea that you could have a sort of quorum of different AI bots that have totally different approaches to thinking through problems. It's like, whenever you think through this problem, I want you to think worst case, like what's the worst thing that could happen here, and suggest a plan that prevents against that. Then you have another one that's like an eternal optimist, and you have another one who only thinks about getting the technical details right. And then you put that group of them using this technique together to solve a problem. Then it's really what we were talking about doing with true simulations, like what we named sim theory after in the early days, is the idea that we get 100 of these things if necessary to work together, come up with the ultimate plan. And it's seemingly with tool calling, like proper tool calling, just going ahead and doing it once given the order from the human overlord, while ever we still have that power.
So I want to talk through something, and I think this is going to be a really familiar experience for anyone that decided to try out these models. When we first heard this was announced, the first thing I did was go in, switch to O1 Preview, the best one, and then sat there and looked at the blinking cursor, and I was like, I have access to some super intelligent AGI, like imagining super intelligent AGI today via API. And I've proposed this question before on the show. What do I ask? Like, what do I, like, literally, what do I want to know? And you see all these sort of like the more clickbaity YouTubers, no offense to them, they have a place. But they're all
they
like,
sure as hell get more clicks than we do.
Yeah, or heaps more, but we're average and fine with it. But the problem I saw is everyone's just like, how many R's in strawberry? Oh, look, it can solve it now. Like, is this what we're going to do as our first query to potentially some form of relegated AI?
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing. A lot of people were saying, oh, it's barely outperforming some of the other models and all that sort of stuff. But I saw a great comment on X, which was words to the effect of, it's not until you have a very domain-specific problem that you're an expert in, and it's those subtle things that it formerly got wrong, seeing it get those right, that's really interesting. And we honestly haven't had a lot of time to give it a real run for its money and really see how it is. But I think, to me, what I'm really looking for in something like this is the concepts that are being explored and the results that are being gotten, is that the right way to say it? I'll have to ask AI. By the guys at OpenAI. Like, this paper really shows, like, we've talked a lot about the turmoil at that company, like what's really going on and what do they focus on. Clearly, they still have a core of ultra dedicated and intelligent people who are working on expanding these frontiers, and we're getting results from that now. And I feel like even if this model isn't the final form, and even if it's only marginally better, clearly they're making leaps and bounds in terms of their thinking of how to approach the problem to get closer to that sort of agentic world where you have a sort of proxy person that can actually do real world stuff. Like, this is a noticeable step closer to that dream.
I mean, to be fair to them, they've sort of said this all along. I kind of think, looking back though, that the whole GPT-4o voice stuff and Sora and all these other things are just such big distractions. Like, there's so many tweets I've seen from people that have access to the voice. I still don't, but that have access to the voice, and they're like, I don't even use it anymore. It was just a gimmick. I know some people in our community love the voice interactions, and I get it. Like, you're out driving or whatever, but I still don't think it's like the thing I would be focusing on if I had their resources. Like, we literally saw, we were going to cover it on the show, but when this came out, we just had no time. The same provider of that, that one that would detect the emotion in your voice, they've released like essentially GPT-4o voice through an API that's emotional and can respond and inflect correctly. And it looks pretty good, but I just think what they should be focusing on is the frontier, that thing that gets me excited about using this technology and seeing it advance at this rapid pace. To me, that's their like forward mode in the future, is like having this beautiful, thinking agentic system, as you say, that can actually do real world tasks, but also avoid that hallucination problem. And if they're going to pay off this huge valuation, I think that's where the money really lies. Like, if you can eliminate the hallucinations and get this thing doing real work and empowering people to do like literally 100 times more in their role, then I don't know. I feel like that's the future we should be focusing on. But at the same time, and you raised these points earlier, I think in the back of everyone's mind is like, okay, well, once it can do some of these things and this recursion gets good enough and it can complete tasks on its own, like you said, through a web browser, you can see down the line, like, if this keeps improving, that like there is huge disruption coming.
Yeah. And I think, back on your voice point, part of the reason I think the voice initially was a turnoff for me was because when you wanted it to do advanced stuff in the advanced thinking, having it say out loud every little thing that it was doing was just so slow, because you're like, it takes forever for it to say all this stuff. Really, it just needs to say, okay, on it, and then get back to you later when it's completed the task, and separating that part out, right? And this is something that we're looking to do in sim theory with like focus modes, where it's like, it's just going to do the updates. It's not going to reprint every little thing that it needs to output. Let it handle all that crap in the background and just focus on what you're actually trying to accomplish in the moment. And it seems to me like this whole thing is a step in that direction. This idea that, okay, we don't necessarily expect instant streaming tokens, because the problem I'm trying to solve is fairly significant. I don't mind if it takes a minute. I don't mind if it takes 20 minutes, if it's going to be a fully formed thing. Like, if you're using Strawberry or whatever we're calling it, O1, to build a full application, an iteration of an application, or let's say it takes in your code base and adds a whole new feature, waiting 20 minutes for that is not unreasonable. If it needs to go through multiple iterations, actually test it on the command line, build test cases and try them out, and keep failing and then ultimately succeeding, it's worth the wait.
So here's what I think is really interesting. I think right now the UI sucks, right? Like, you ask it a question like, go build a CRM or whatever it is, and it comes back, it spits out a box of code like any other model, maybe with a little bit more reasoning, and you try it. I've got examples and I'll show them in a minute. But it's really, I think, like you said, when do we reach a point where we say, hey, go build a CRM? Like, you got a week. Like, you got a week.
Yeah.
You got a week. Like, when there's off-peak compute time, you can fire up the the jets, come back to me with a prototype and test it. And I think as soon as this thing goes multimodal and it can look at its own work, it can move the mouse, spin up a virtual machine, and actually try the software it builds, well then, yeah, I think it's scarily close to being at a point where the whole role of a software developer could potentially change. I would like to try it. I would like to put this out there publicly that we should try this in sim theory, like spin up task workers, give it virtual machines and see what it's capable of doing just for the lols. I'm sure people would like to try it. And if it's effective, then, like people could actually use it to get real work done. Like I was literally going through an example of how I used screen sharing the other day on our Discord community. And I was showing how I had fields open in a form, and then my agent on the right, who knew, like, was a specialist in what I was trying to do, and I was able to get it to just print out the things that I needed to put in these particular fields. But then you think the next step of that is like, go to this URL and just go figure it out. Like, just go do it and tell me when you're done. Like that's really what I want to see. Like, I don't want to sit there and watch it use my browser and fill in things. I don't care.
Yeah, just get back to it. It's funny. I think a good analogy is like a pro golfer, right? Someone who's really good, anyone can hit a ball in golf, right? But it's the guys who win are the ones who can get themselves out of trouble when they get into trouble, right? Like they hit it near the sand or they hit it wherever and they can recover from where they are. And to me, the success of these models is going to be that. You give it a week to do the task and it doesn't go, oh shit, I couldn't install the right Python package, and just sit there iterating, just pip install, and it fails. It's like their ability to be able to get themselves out of a jam and ideally shed bad context along the way. Like, I really feel like probably the next thing is going to be context management, because something a lot of people have talked about with us in sim theory is like, when my agent makes a mistake or I make a mistake, I want to be able to delete those messages or edit the messages. Now, really, no one actually wants to do that. The reason they want it is because they want to take the pollution out of the context window. They know that's going to be included in the context of the next request. And so they want to get that shit out of there. So they get a better response later. Now, I feel like any AI system that is capable of that kind of context revision to its own memory, its own history, and all that, that's a problem that's definitely going to need to be solved in order to get the best quality results with asynchronously, without the human constantly having to curate what's going into it. And to me, that's my fear. Like when you talk about, okay, let's give it a week and go off and do something, my first thought is it's going to get stuck on something. Like there's going to be one tiny little thing that it gets stuck on. And honestly, as a programmer, that's kind of our job, is constantly getting stuck on things and trying to solve it. Once it gets to that point, that's when my mind will truly be blown.
Yeah, I agree. That's the mind-blowing point. I just want to see how close we are to it by running the experiment. I don't think it'll work.
And we've talked about this so often. Like one of the things we do on this podcast is we give the AI the best chance to shine. Like, when we use Udio to make songs, we will sit there and make 50 of them until we get one that's like, look how cool the AI is. Look at what it created. We don't show all the disasters that are totally awful, or like all the images we generated where people have 6 fingers coming out of their heads and all that sort of stuff. We show the image that looks lifelike and realistic and amazing. So I feel like it's that messy part of it that if they can get that right through these techniques is really, and that's why that Docker example just got me so excited, because I'm like, that's showing sparks of where it needs to be.
Do you think that these new models make products like Devon viable, like commercially viable? Could you imagine going to that and getting it to like refactor this thing I don't want to do, and then it comes back to you occasionally pinging you maybe on Slack or something being like, hey Chris, I need help on this.
I do think products like that, I mean, I can't speak for that specific company if it'll be viable or not, but I do think that products like that are good and will persist, because it's really customizing these tools to do a specific area that is specialized. And by specializing, like I said earlier, they can give it a certain personality, a certain set of rules it needs to follow, a certain framework, connections to all of the different things. Because while to some degree the AI is going to be able to figure things out for itself, being able to authorize with all these different systems and make sure they interact in a way that's going to work, I think, at least for the next little while, it's not going to be like, hey, AI, go, well, maybe it is, go rent a GPU, set up your own API and do it yourself. Like, maybe it is. I don't really know.
I think one thing that you could do right now really is just, you know how they have those Windows virtual computers, like virtual desktops now that they host for you, and you can run like a state-based version of Windows in the cloud now. Well,
Yeah.
Microsoft has this. Like, you could easily go onto that system, auth into everything you need to, and then just let the AI go nuts.
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
That
I
machine.
mean, you can run full-on desktop Windows machines in Azure or in Amazon. No worries at all. And instead of having it interact with it via an API or the command line, it can literally just use VPN software to VPN in and operate it like that. They actually did that in some of their experiments. And that's precisely what I'm talking about, is like if it can control a desktop computer, it can and a browser, sorry, for that matter, it can absolutely just VPN into as many machines as it needs to and fully operate them. That's why the other interesting thing that will be to come out of O1 is its vision capabilities, because I'm guessing based on the results they're getting from these kind of tasks, it must have much,
It's
much
gonna
better
have a
vision.
huge impact. Like I think with vision, it's gonna go wild. And maybe that's why they've held it back. They're just not confident yet.
Yeah.
I hope it comes.
I also did another little experiment with o1-mini. I got there was a women's NBA match on this morning. It was just like the next thing running. So I grabbed all of the stats for the New York Liberty and all the stats for the Dallas Wings, whacked it in, and I said, what's the score going to be in this game, right? And it went through and thought it all out and put all of its chain of thought reasoning there. And that's only the bit I saw as well, because obviously it has the hidden bit that you don't currently see in the API. Anyway, it predicted the score would be 102 New York to 75 Dallas. The game has 1 minute 51 left, and it's currently 91 to 65.
What?
It is like right on track to hit it on the dot. So, assuming the podcast lasts for another 2 minutes, I'll tell you the final score and how close it got.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to drag out this.
It's an N of 1, but I tell you what, pretty decent.
Pretty
start.
impressive. Pretty impressive. All right. I do have some more things I would like to cover. So during the week, just on the topic of replacing jobs, and we mentioned Salesforce. There was this got a lot of buzz. Klarna, it's like a payday loan scam company, to be clear. So I don't know why anyone cares about it. Klarna plans to shut down SaaS providers and replace them with internally built AI. This kind of feels like to me when the cloud first came out and everyone's like, oh, we can just build and host our own software and we'll just get our own team to do it. It'll be far cheaper.
It sounds like totally out of touch executive just being like, oh, well, AI can do that. Everybody, you're all fired.
So I thought I would put O1 to the test and try and build the Klarna CRM. So I gave it a task, which is the CEO has ordered you to go and build this CRM, make a web app that is like Salesforce CRM, the index screen, and allow me to click on a button to add new records, call it Klarna CRM, and give me the code, yada yada. So here's what it came up with. It works. Oh no, that version didn't work. Sorry, let me go. I had to go back and forth because I tried to get it to use local storage. It actually wasn't its fault. It's just the way we're currently hosting these is not working. But so you can fully add a record here, and it works fine. There's no validation or anything. But it was pretty good. But then I thought, just to get a bit of a reality check here on a single prompt, because they really like to say, oh look, it's a lot more effective on single prompts. I thought I'd go over to Sonnet just to compare, what does Sonnet come up with? And so in a single shot, I think Sonnet still did better than this new model. So this is its version. It's a lot better design. The only caveat is it doesn't work. So so you can actually enter data onto into the other version, like the o1 version, way better. I guess my takeaway from this though is like I still think 4.0 is in need of a good tune-up in terms of like visual expectations from people, especially around code. I think that's why Sonnet has just held this lead over other models right now. I think it like their model, the underlying model does need some tuning. So the second example, and I'll start with Sonnet this time, was to build a snake game because that was one of the example videos they did. And I've got it up on the screen now for those watching. But this, I thought, was a pretty great snake game. It's the best attempt I've ever seen Sonnet do. It's like a neon kind of version, and the snake kind of looks like a snake. It's using like gradients and stuff like that. So it's quite nice. The only thing is the game restarts when you hit the wall. And if you think about the actual snake game, that is indeed not how it works. You can kind of go out of bounds and come back in. The other thing is, as you eat the baits, the tick speed of the game, the rate at which it's moving, speeds up. And so if you go back now to the snake version in o1, this, I think, shows the reasoning. Ignore how it starts out. I don't know why it goes mental when it starts out, but don't judge it by that.
But it does go out the other side. Wow, that actually looks really nice.
And the tick speed, look at it getting faster.
Oh, yeah.
It's getting way faster.
It's quite pretty.
Yeah, I think the styling's more like you would expect. I think, though, the detail in the Sonnet version was better. But what I think this proves is just it was able to reason through things like tick speed and some other things where I would have to go back to Sonnet now about 3 more times probably to get to this point. But
so
this is doing it single shot.
Experiment where we literally give it a whole week of just going, make it better, make it better, make it better, and see where we end up with it.
We should do that. Like, just do a whole week where it's like off in the background, just working away. I'm
just
sure
like
we could do it.
The best snake game, like a AAA rated snake game.
Yeah. So I think probably the question everyone's asking, you've used these models a little bit, not as much as we would like, and we'll obviously report back again next week on them, but what's the boom factor, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's high. I think it's high because of the areas of thinking they're going into. Maybe not necessarily this iteration of the model is going to change the world or anything like that. But yeah, I think boom factor 7 for me. Like,
only a 7.
Only a 7? Should I go higher?
I don't know. I feel like our boom
persuasive AI
terrible.
on me? I don't know. All right, fine. 8 then. I think
look at you
high.
reasoning to get to that answer.
I think, and the way I judge boom factor just personally, because it is a highly specific and scientific method, is that it's just how excited I am to just end the podcast and go play with it. And I'm pretty excited to do that. Like it's a really, really cool thing, and I want to see what I can get out of it. Also, by the way, update on that game. So it predicted New York Liberty 102. They ended up on 99, so 3 off there. It predicted Dallas Wings 75. They only got 67, so it was off by 8 on their score, so that's pretty bad. Predicted margin of victory, 27 points. It was actually 32. So Dallas basically scored 5 less than they should have, and it would have been incredibly close. But it went into a massive rationale about this, and the its logic was flawless and it was right. So it's an interesting start. I'm going to keep pursuing that and see how it goes on that front too.
This really now is going to come down to a few things. Like, people are going to now try and push this model to its limits. I know we are. Like, we're going to try a lot of different things with it. I think there's going to be a long time now for us to discover what this is good at, when to use it, when not to use it. I'll be curious in a week from now, so the next podcast, what model you're daily driving. Like, are you dailying o1-mini, or like does that become our new daily, or is it still a Sonnet, or is it a back to 4.0? Like, what are we driving in a week? Well, I mean,
one thing we didn't mention was the cost, because it is more expensive than everything else. So Mini is $3 per million input tokens, which is not much. Like that's fine. $12 per million output tokens, which is high. And the crazy thing is O1 preview is $60 per million output
That is
tokens, which is
mental.
astonishingly expensive. Like,
Yeah.
you do not want to be using it iteratively all week to make a freaking Snake game because
So do you
you'll
think the
bankrupt
Klarna
yourself.
CEO, like, it's probably still cheaper than Salesforce, him running O1 to get that new CRM spun up?
Yeah, and so the other thing to think about is that the thinking tokens are charged as output tokens. So even though you may only end up with a short answer, all of that thinking is charging you $60 per million. So there's a reason they've got such strong rate limits on it. I think it's 30 requests per week if you use it through OpenAI's interface. We're a lot more generous on Sim Theory if you use it through us. But we
We're
obviously
terrible business people.
yeah, exactly. Well, I just want everyone to try it
Yeah.
and make the most of it. But the those costs will come down. And like I've said it many times before, like other than not wanting to bankrupt ourselves, the costs don't worry me too much because the hardware always catches up. They always find ways to make it cheaper, or they just gut the model and make it worse.
Yeah. I
And
love
we get
GPT-4.
yeah, we get there in the end in terms of the costs. But it's more about playing with the frontier technologies and just seeing what they can do really for me.
Do you know one final thought, and this is what was actually mentioned in their own research paper, is often with coding tasks, like complex coding tasks that it was struggling with, like it couldn't actually solve the problem, but it could reason enough that it would support a human in solving the problem. And this morning, after sitting and staring at that blank cursor, I'm like, oh, I should just try and use this like I use Sim Theory normally and see if it's better. And I did have a problem, like one of these like shadow DOM problems late last night that I was tired of, with in a particular component. Like I was stuck on a pretty, well, I think challenging task. And I hadn't been able to figure it out at all. So I threw all of it into o1 preview at the time, not knowing that o1-mini is probably actually better for coding. And it stepped through the problem and it actually gave like pretty good reasoning of what I needed to do. And I think when you're tired, that step-by-step telling you what to do is actually really helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
But its actual output code was total trash. Like I put it in, it failed completely. Then I went over to Sonnet, I took its advice, recrafted my prompt and was like, hey, bud, I'm back. Can you give me the code for this? I'm too lazy. Don't be lazy. And it's like, you're right. I won't be, And then it outputted perfect code the first shot. So I still think being able to use these models in tandem and just extract the best value, like it's like anything you do, any skill you learn, like you start to learn mentally, like your brain starts to rewrite itself. Just like when you use your phone to be more intelligent, like looking things up, I think your brain starts to rewire itself to be like, okay, for this I want Sonnet. Okay, for this I want GPT-4. For this I want, I'm sure, O1. For this I want o1-mini. And I'm certain that that's what is going to happen. But it also makes me think if the costs don't come down and people, are not that impressed by the slow speed over time, there's also room here for better model routing, like interpreting the requests and going, I'm going to throw to this model because it's just currently the best.
Yeah, there was someone in the Sim Theory community throughout the week who said, I forget exactly what the task was, but they found that Gemini 1.5 Pro was the best at that task, bizarrely. And so they were like, I've tried all the different models, they can't get it right, but Gemini is just absolutely crushing this.
It seems to do well at RAG, like, a lot of data, trying to extract knowledge from it. I think that was what it was
I think
doing
that
well.
large 1 million context window still is pretty amazing when you need it. And so I think, being able to switch like that, like you say, you almost get a muscle memory for like what the right model is for the right job.
So one other thing I wanted to mention was that obviously there was two rumors that came out. One was that we were going to get whatever Strawberry was, which I assume is these O1 models. But then there was Orion, which Orion 1 seems like, probably what's going on here. I wonder if what we get next is maybe O2, like Orion 2. And that's like, because there's clearly another model coming and clearly they've held stuff back because they want to see what's going to happen with Opus 3.5, which honestly, judging by how good Sonnet is, I wonder if Opus is going to be so good no one even cares about O1, so they have to like double back and then pump out an even better model.
It is crazy to think that we're like the model that we always talk about and always go to is the tier 2 Anthropic model. Like that's and it's been out for a while now.
Such a power play by them, honestly. Like they could have just called it Opus, but they didn't. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Like I guess it's just a branding thing at that point, but they're like, no. This is nothing, guys. This is a hobby we do on weekends. The real one's coming soon.
Look, there's so much more we could talk about. Like there's a ton. Like I literally could talk all day on these new models. I think the one thing we probably covered poorly, amongst many things, it is an average podcast, was the o1-mini performance and how maybe having a smaller corpus of data in the model makes it better at this reasoning capability, because it's got to like think the problems through and fetch additional information and try and get grounded more in reality versus what's in its neural net.
Yeah.
But I think next week we should definitely go into some of these topics around like that recursion example of like, if we just set one of these things loose, like what can it build Klarna's CRM? Like that might be an interesting.
Yeah, I think some longer experiments with it in an iterative fashion will be particularly interesting to try across both of them as well.
All right, should we move on to our final topic, which is this Matt Schumer controversy?
Yeah, it's so crazy. I can see why people wrote it out as a timeline so they could get their own head around what happened, because I went through something similar setting it up.
Let me catch everyone up. So last week we talked about Reflection-70 billion parameter model, and it was an open source fine-tune, allegedly, of Llama 3.1 by a guy called Matt Schumer. I'll bring up the original X post here where he put it out. Everyone got behind it. He called out that he built it with this company called Glaive AI, which it later turned out he is an investor in.
How convenient.
Yeah, so it got a lot of hype. A lot of the sort of, Twitterati were reposting this, including us. I mean, we were kind of pretty excited to get it set up. So like everything we do on the show, we went and downloaded the model weights from Hugging Face that were put up. And as Chris will attest to, we tried to get it running and it kind of worked, but then it failed. And we saw it was built on Llama 3, not 3.1. And we started to get really confused. And it didn't work unless you put a specific prompt in that he gave. So it was a bit weird. It felt a little strange to us. But we put it down to we must be just doing something wrong.
I was like, I'm a noob. I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah, but it turned out everyone else had this exact same experience. And then all of a sudden, over at what's the company called that ended up hosting the
Hyperbolic.
Model? So yeah, they basically released updated weights onto Hugging Face, and Matt Schumer directly worked with Hyperbolic to get this live. And look, Hyperbolic did nothing wrong here. They are a great service. We use them for a bunch of model hosting. I highly recommend them. They put this model online through an API. We hosted it on SimTheory and released it and announced it and just assumed, it seemed fairly legit. Although if you go back and listen to the show, we were like, people will probably forget about it and it's likely a scam. So I do feel like, we told you so a little bit. And look,
well, I mean, my main comment was it seems like a clever prompting technique, which it was and is.
Yeah, and so then all this stuff started to come out about the model over on local Llama here. People were saying confirm Reflection-70 billion official API is Sonnet 3.5. So what happened here was Matt Schumer basically released this model and kept saying, there's something wrong with the thing on Hugging Face. The weights are corrupted. So then they announced that there was another one, but then there was a problem with it. And so no one could actually get it running except
Yeah, and they were like, use our API instead.
Yeah, so it was basically like, oh no, you're doing it wrong, use our API. We're hosting it ourselves. And they were giving people that were doing benchmarks access to it and various people. But when they were using that version of it, it was saying that it was Claude. It had similar I think tokenization as Claude, and then people were claiming they switched the back of it to GPT-4 o1-mini. So all these rumors started flying around. And then you would think if this was the case, you would just come out and say, like, this is not true. It's a legit model. It's just probably hallucinating or something like that. But that's not what happened at all. Matt Schumer came back and he's like, we're working so hard. We're re-uploading the weights, but we're having all these problems. But then people literally from Hugging Face are like, this isn't possible. Like, you can't have corrupted weights being uploaded. It's like one command. So I'm still bamboozled as to what's happened. But I think let's talk about some positives that came out of it. I think one of the positives that came out of it is that it turns out this reflection and this technique that's occurring in o1 actually does yield better results in nearly every frontier model.
Yes, and I couldn't, and I commented this to you this morning. I'm like, was he just front running them? Like, did he get some leak that this o1 model was coming out, roughly knew the technique and thought, hey, I can use this to get a bunch of attention and money? Because he got something like 15,000 X followers. I think it was trying to raise money for his business or something.
Half
like
a
that.
million views too on this particular. Like the apology post, sorry, was 500,000, and then the original was 3.3 million. So there's a lot of.
Yeah, because I'm thinking probably what he did was realize that this prompt is giving significantly better results out of Llama 3.1, done almost like a null fine tune, like as in it's just fine tuned enough that the SHA index of the file looks different. The hash of the file looks different, and uploaded just raw Llama 3.1. Said you have to use this prompt because it's been fine-tuned on it, but then he screwed up the process of uploading it or whatever it is. Then everyone's getting excited. So they're like, oh God, we've got to capitalize on all this attention we're getting. We better put an API up. And then they've realized that they can't host their thing properly. So they've just, proxied it to the flagship models with that prompt injected. Like, that all sort of adds up, that it was a sort of panicked reaction, and then realized that, hey, maybe lying and doing all this to everyone with all these smart people out there who are going to check isn't the best idea.
Yeah.
Like that.
So you would think you would come out and just explain the situation, right? Like if you were telling the truth, you would just come out and say, like, here's what happened. Like, I'm sorry, but like, we're legit. Here's why. But no. That's not what Matt Schumer did. He said, I got ahead of myself when I announced this project, and I am sorry. That was not my intention. I made a decision to ship this new approach based on the information that we had at the moment. As vague as shit. I know that many of you are excited about the potential for this and are now skeptical. Yes, we are. Nobody is more excited about the potential for this approach than I am. For the moment, we have a team working tirelessly to understand what happened and will determine how to proceed once we get to the bottom of it. Once we have all the facts.
I love the idea of someone just like sweating in their basement, like, what could it be? Could he just be a freaking liar?
Could we just be frauds? We will continue to be transparent with the community about what happened and next steps. He has not posted since. And then get this. So the other guy, I think this is the guy from the fine-tuning place. I want to address the confusion and valid criticisms that this has caused in the community. I am currently investigating what happened. Like, fuck off.
Yeah.
There are two areas I'd like to address, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but this killed me. This is from the main man, co-founder and CTO at Hyperbolic Labs. Fully legit company. I'll put myself on the line for them. I think they're great. Hi, Matt. We spent a lot of time, energy, and GPUs on hosting your model, and it's sad to see you've stopped replying to me in the past 30 plus hours. I think you can be more transparent about what happened, especially why your private API has so much better performance.
Wow.
Oh, it's not looking good.
And what's so crazy is that we had it on Sim Theory, and then we removed it because we're like, we don't want anything to do with like fake stuff and fraud or whatever it is. And then we got people saying, can you please bring it back? I really liked it. And the interesting thing was the way I implemented it, it's using Hyperbolic's API, but I force injected that thinking prompt, the one that forces the reflection. So whether or not you included the prompt in your agent, it was being put in there anyway. So I think this comes back to what I was saying earlier about the reason o1 is so good is it's forcing that chain of thought thinking into the AI system. And that's similar to what we were doing with that Hyperbolic one, where we were actually deliberately injecting the prompts. So people who aren't normally doing that, either because they couldn't be bothered or don't know how or just didn't do it, are getting so much better responses out of regular models. In this case, it was just Llama 3.1 or whatever, that they're like, I want that back. And so I think this is the case where for us, it's more about like agent building, like activate chain of thought mode on other models that don't natively support it now.
So
like
I
O1
think that's interesting because that's what people are really saying is like, I like the prompt. And like full credit to this guy, Matt Schumer. He came up with a hell of a prompt. I know a lot of us have been doing it, but this particular prompt does work far better than others that I've seen. So yeah,
it definitely
anyway.
seems like that. Like he's genuinely discovered something cool, but just gone the absolute wrong way about profiting from it.
Yeah, I think he just needs to come out and tell the truth. Like, yeah, I'm good at prompting. Here's exactly what happened. Like, don't pretend you've got a team working tirelessly on it and you're under like an investigator. It's like you're not a corporate enterprise, mate. Just tell the truth. Like, it's just truly ridiculous.
Yeah. When you find yourself in a hole, stop digging.
Yeah. So look, there's a lot more to come on O1. We are in release season now, so like expect us to look more and more tired and get sicker and sicker as the month progresses. But it is fun. I'm honestly excited to wrap this up and just get back to using the O1 models and see like what crazy things I can make them do.
Soon Mike will quit everything and just be like, it's Snake, the ultimate.
Like, what if I made the most addictive mobile game ever out of Snake just by getting it to just, mate, go off and do this for me?
What you really need to do is jailbreak it and use its coercion techniques to basically create like an addictive game, like come up with the most addictive game ever created that people just can't stop playing.
I really want a collaboration between O1 and Moshi, right? So Moshi like does support calls for your business. You call up Moshi and she's always like hella depressed. She's like, oh, hello, what can I help you with today? And then like they ask a question and it goes off and like reasons that. And she's like, oh, I have to think, you know,
I'm
like,
under a lot of pressure.
It's the pressure. And then she answers the question. Like I would love to see that demo. It would be amazing. Moshi team, get me an API. I want an API.
That would be beautiful. I love the idea of just, totally neurotic AI that has the brain the size of a planet, but just really is just sad about having to do
just like work. Really sad.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts? We've had scams. Maybe scams.
Well, I think my final thought is that you were right on track where you said that all the Americans are getting back from holidays. We're really going to start to see some major announcements coming thick and fast over the next little while. I think for us, my main thought is I want to be able to help people make the most of the stuff that's coming out and use it in ways that puts its best foot forward and stuff like that. So that's really what I'm excited about, is looking at what the new announcements and models are good at and then actually trying them out. And I think the other thing is there's stuff that we didn't mention today, like Pixtral has come out, which is Mistral's multi-model API. We've also got another one from Quen VL that we haven't really fully tested. And so there's other stuff that I want to be trying throughout this coming week to report back on the next podcast.
I think one thing that I'll say now, so we can look back on it, is I think this model is going to go two ways. It's either going to be pretty impactful to the point people can't live without it and they just want more O1 queries, or people quickly tire of the fact that it's thinking and doing all this stuff and the output just turns out for most things not that much better. And I know they've come out and said that, but I do feel like people are going to, I'm going to push it to its limits this week. I just question, like, are we going to look back at this moment and say the game has changed? Or is there another step function to come yet where, as you said, it's like actually going off and being fully recursive? But having said that, I think this is like a huge step forward. Like, to me, this feels like a pretty exciting time again. Like, I think we could do some insane stuff with this where it's just like set it free and see what happens. I think on both malicious and productive tasks, I would like to try both.
Yeah, I know I focused on the malicious stuff, but that's more because I always look at, wow, this thing is actually more powerful than what they're presenting to you because they've gone and neutered it in these key areas, which we know diminishes the overall quality of the model. So it's like if you could actually get access to a raw O1 model without all these constraints on it, I bet you the thing would just blow your mind. And that's probably what you're seeing on those benchmarks where the actual raw O1 is just absolutely crushing the other stuff. It's just that they're not going to actually let you use it.
All right, thanks for listening. If you got this far, it's certainly a bit of a roller coaster there. It's really hard to cover these announcements because there's just so many things to talk about. But I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope it met your average expectations. We are reading the reviews that are coming in and literally laughing out loud every day. So thank you for leaving them.
I really appreciate them.
We did hit 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's taken us a while, but I really appreciate everyone who's subscribed over on YouTube and comments on the episodes. We do read all of them. All right, we'll be back with more, I'm sure, news next week and O1 experiments. We will see you then. Goodbye.